Have you ever looked at your own life and quietly wondered when it stopped feeling like yours? Have you ever woken up one morning, not with fear, not with sadness, but with something heavier, something harder to name? A quiet feeling that time has passed and you were too busy surviving to notice? What would you do if the life you built for decades suddenly felt unfamiliar? What if the person who showed you how to begin again was not a teacher, not a friend, but your own child? And what if that lesson came at a moment when you believed it was already too late? My name is Min. I turned 53 last winter, and for most of my life, I believed I understood what it meant to be responsible. I woke up early, I worked long hours, I paid the bills, I made sure my family had everything they needed. At least, that's what I told myself. For nearly 30 years, I worked at the same company, a small manufacturing firm on the edge of the city. It was not a dream job, but it was stable, predictable, safe. And at some point, without realizing it, I stopped asking for anything more. I told myself that dreams were for younger people, for people who had time, for people who could afford to fail. I was not one of those people. I had a wife, a son, a house that still had 10 years left on the loan. Responsibility became my identity, and slowly, quietly, I disappeared inside it. My son, Anne, was different. He asked questions I never dared to ask. He challenged things I accepted without thinking. He believed in possibilities I had already given up on. When he was a child, I used to smile at his curiosity. When he became a teenager, I started to worry about it. Life is not that simple, I would tell him. You have to be realistic. He never argued loudly, he just listened. And then he continued being himself. At the time, I thought I was teaching him how to survive. I didn't realize he was quietly learning how not to become me. Everything changed on a Tuesday afternoon. It was cold, not the kind of cold that hurts your skin, but the kind that settles deep inside your bones. I was called into the office. There were three people sitting across the table, people I had known for years, people who had watched me grow older in that building. They spoke gently, carefully, like people who had practiced this conversation before. The company was restructuring. They appreciated my dedication. They were grateful for my years of service. And just like that, my job ended. 30 years. Reduced to a handshake, a polite smile, a folder with documents I barely understood. I remember walking out of the building slowly, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know how to walk any faster. The parking lot looked the same, the sky looked the same, but something inside me had shifted. Or maybe something inside me had finally broken. I sat in my car for a long time. I didn't turn on the engine. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there, staring at my hands. They looked older than I remembered. That evening, I didn't tell my wife right away. I told myself I needed time. Time to think, time to understand. But the truth was, I didn't know how to say the words out loud. I lost my job. It sounded too simple, too small, for something that felt so large inside my chest. When I finally told her, she didn't panic. She nodded slowly. She asked practical questions. She said we would figure it out. She was strong, stronger than me, but I could see it in her eyes, the quiet fear she didn't want to show. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the same thoughts again and again. Who would hire someone my age? What skills did I even have? What had I been doing all these years? I had spent decades working, but suddenly I felt completely unprepared. The next morning, everything felt different. The house was quieter. The clock sounded louder. Even the sunlight felt unfamiliar. For the first time in years, I had nowhere to go. At first, I told myself it was temporary, a short break, a moment to rest. But as days passed, that feeling began to change. Rest turned into restlessness, silence turned into doubt. I started avoiding people. Friends would call, I wouldn't answer. Neighbors would ask how work was going. I would smile and say, busy as always. It became easier to lie than to explain the truth. My world began to shrink from an office to a house, from conversations to silence. And then, one afternoon, Anne came home. He had been away for a few months, working on a project in another city. He walked into the house with the same energy he always had, the same light in his eyes. But this time, he noticed something immediately. "You're home," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. "For how long?" I hesitated. "A while." He didn't say anything after that. He just looked at me, not with judgment, not with disappointment, but with something else, something I couldn't understand at the time. That evening, we sat together at the dinner table. The conversation was simple, careful. My wife spoke more than usual, trying to fill the silence, and listened. He always listened. And then, when the dishes were cleared, he asked one question. "Dad, are you happy?" The room went completely still. It was such a simple question, but it felt heavier than anything I had heard in years. I wanted to answer quickly, to say something safe, something easy. Yes, that's what I had said my entire life. But this time, the word didn't come out. Instead, there was silence. And in that silence, something uncomfortable began to rise. Memories, regrets, questions I had buried for years. Was I happy? Or had I just been busy? Was I living my life? Or was I just maintaining it? I looked at my son, and for the first time, I didn't see a child. I saw someone who was not afraid to ask the questions I had avoided my entire life. "I don't know," I said quietly. It was the most honest answer I had given in years, and nodded, not surprised, not shocked, just understanding. And then he said something that would stay with me forever. "It's okay if you don't know." He paused, "but it's not okay to stop asking." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about his words, not because they were loud, but because they were true. For years, I had stopped asking. I stopped asking what I wanted. I stopped asking what made me feel alive. I stopped asking if I was happy. I had chosen safety. And in doing so, I had slowly given up something I didn't even realize I was losing. The next morning, Anne knocked on my door. "Come with me," he said. "Where?" I asked. "You'll see." I almost said no. I almost told him I was busy, that I had things to figure out. But the truth was, I had nothing. So I said yes, and that simple decision would become the first step in a journey I never expected to take. We drove in silence for a while. The city slowly disappeared behind us. Buildings turned into trees. Noise turned into wind. I didn't ask where we were going. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself not to be in control. After about an hour, we stopped. It was a small place, simple, quiet, a workshop. Inside, there were a few people working, not in a hurry, not under pressure, just focused, present. "What is this place?" I asked, and smiled. "It's where people start again." I frowned. "What does that mean?" He looked at me, the same calm expression. "It means nobody here cares how old you are." He paused. "They only care if you're willing to learn." Something inside me tightened. Learn? At my age? After everything I had already done? It sounded uncomfortable, unnecessary, maybe even embarrassing. I don't think this is for me, I said quickly, and didn't argue. He didn't try to convince me. He just asked one question. The man you were yesterday. He paused, letting the words settle. Is he enough for the life you still have? I didn't answer, because deep down, I already knew the truth. And that truth was the most uncomfortable thing I had ever faced. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of failure. I was afraid of staying the same and standing there in that quiet workshop with my son beside me. I realized something I had never allowed myself to believe before. Maybe, just maybe, starting over was not the end of my story. Maybe it was the beginning of the life I had been too afraid to live. But I still didn't know one thing. Could I really change after 50? Or was I already too late? And more importantly, why did my son believe in me more than I believed in myself? The answer to that question was something I was not ready to hear. Not yet. I didn't step inside the workshop right away. I stood near the entrance, as if there was an invisible line on the floor that I wasn't allowed to cross. Inside, people moved quietly. A woman in her 60s was carefully sanding a piece of wood. A young man, maybe in his 20s, was sketching something on a large table. Another man, older than me, was watching closely, learning, asking questions. No one seemed rushed. No one looked stressed. It was so different from the world I had known for 30 years. There were no deadlines, no loud instructions, no one checking the time every few minutes. Just people, working, learning, starting. Come in, Anne said gently. I shook my head. I don't belong here. The words came out faster than I expected. Too fast, too familiar, and didn't respond immediately. He stepped inside first, then turned back and looked at me. Do you know what everyone here has in common? He asked. I didn't answer. They all thought the same thing on their first day. I frowned. That they don't belong? He nodded. And now? I asked. He smiled slightly. Now they're too busy learning to think about belonging. Something about that sentence stayed with me. Too busy learning to think about belonging. For years, I had done the opposite. I spent my life trying to belong, trying to fit into a system, trying to meet expectations. And in the process, I stopped learning. I took a small step forward, then another. Each step felt heavier than it should have, not because the ground was difficult, but because my thoughts were. What if I fail? What if I look foolish? What if everyone sees that I don't know anything? These questions followed me like shadows, but for some reason, they didn't stop me this time. When I finally stepped inside, no one looked at me, no one judged me, no one even noticed. And strangely, that made it easier to breathe. A man approached us after a few minutes. He looked calm, maybe in his late 40s. First time? He asked. I nodded. He extended his hand. Welcome. I'm Hui. His voice was warm, not formal, not distant, just human. I'm Min, I said. He didn't ask about my past. He didn't ask about my job. He just asked one simple question. What would you like to learn? I froze. No one had asked me that in years. What would I like to learn? Not what I should do, not what I have to do, but what I want. The question felt unfamiliar. I don't know, I admitted. I nodded. That's a good place to start. I almost laughed. In my world, not knowing was a weakness. But here, it seemed to be accepted, even welcomed. He walked me around the workshop, different areas, different activities, woodworking, basic design, repair work, simple tools I had never used before. These are not just skills, I said. They're ways of thinking. I didn't fully understand what he meant, but I listened, really listened, for the first time in a long time. I wasn't waiting to speak. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just present. We stopped near a table with small wooden pieces, simple shapes, some finished, some not. Try this, Hoy said. He handed me a piece of sandpaper. I looked at it. It seemed too simple, too basic. I haven't done anything like this before, I said. That's perfect, he replied. No habits to unlearn. I hesitated. Then slowly, I started. The sound of sandpaper against wood was soft, rhythmic. At first, my movements were stiff, careful, like someone afraid of making mistakes. But after a few minutes, something changed. The tension in my shoulders eased. My breathing slowed. My thoughts quieted. There was no pressure. No one was watching. No one was judging. It was just me and a small piece of wood. I don't know how long I stood there. Time felt different. When I finally stopped, I looked at the piece in my hand. It wasn't perfect, but it was smoother, better than before. And for a brief moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a quiet sense of satisfaction, not because it was impressive, but because I had done it. Not bad, Anne said behind me. I turned and looked at him. There was no teasing in his voice, no hidden judgment, just encouragement, and somehow, that meant more than anything else. We stayed there for a few hours. I tried different things, made small mistakes, learned small lessons, nothing dramatic, nothing life-changing, but something inside me began to shift, slowly, gently, like ice melting under the sun. On the way home, we didn't talk much, but the silence felt different this time. It wasn't heavy, it wasn't uncomfortable, it was calm. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks, not because my problems were solved, but because, for the first time, I felt like I had taken a step forward, even if it was a small one. The next morning, I woke up early, out of habit, but instead of feeling lost, I felt something else. Curiosity. It was faint, fragile, but it was there. I made breakfast, sat by the window, and for the first time in years, I didn't turn on the television. I just sat there, thinking about the workshop, about the people, about the feeling of doing something new. When Anne came downstairs, I looked at him. Are you going back today? I asked. He smiled. I was hoping you would ask. I nodded. I want to go again. The words felt strange, but also right. Days turned into a routine. We went to the workshop regularly, not every day, but often enough. Each visit, I learned something small: how to use a tool, how to fix a mistake, how to be patient. But more importantly, I was learning something deeper: how to be a beginner again. And that was the hardest lesson of all. Because being a beginner means accepting something most adults try to avoid. You don't know. You're not good. You will make mistakes, and people might see it. At first, this made me uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. I compared myself to others. I noticed how slow I was, how unsure my hands felt, but over time, that comparison began to fade because I realized something simple. Everyone here was focused on their own journey, not mine. No one was measuring me, except myself. One afternoon, while working on a small project, I made a mistake, a clear one, the kind that couldn't be ignored. I sighed, put the tool down, and said quietly, I messed up. I walked over. He looked at the piece, then looked at me. Good, he said. I blinked. Good? I repeated. He nodded. That means you're trying. I shook my head. But it's wrong. He smiled. Then fix it. It's not that simple, I said. He leaned slightly closer. It never is. He paused. But that doesn't mean you stop. Those words stayed with me because they applied to more than just the piece of wood in front of me. They applied to my life. For years, I had avoided mistakes, chose the safe path, the predictable one. But now I began to see something clearly. Avoiding mistakes had also meant avoiding growth. That evening, as we were about to leave, I noticed something. Anne was talking to he. Their conversation seemed serious, quiet. I didn't think much of it at the time. But later, on the way home, I asked, "What were you talking about?" Anne hesitated, just for a moment. "Nothing important," he said. I didn't push, but something in his tone felt different. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had changed in just a few days. It wasn't dramatic. There was no big success, no sudden transformation. But inside, something was moving. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what might come next. But there was still something I didn't understand. Why had Anne brought me there? Why did he believe that I could start again? And more importantly, what did he see in me that I had never seen in myself? The answer was something I would soon discover. And when I did, it would change not only how I saw my future, but how I understood my past. Because the truth was, this was never just about learning something new. It was about facing something old, something I had been avoiding for most of my life. There is a moment, not loud, not dramatic, when the past quietly walks back into your life, not to hurt you, not to punish you, but to ask a question you have been avoiding for years. I didn't recognize that moment at first. It came on an ordinary afternoon. The workshop was calm, as always. Soft sounds of tools, low voices, the quiet rhythm of people focused on their work. I had been going there for almost 2 weeks, long enough to feel less like a stranger, but not long enough to feel confident. That day, Hui gave me a slightly bigger task. A small wooden box, simple in design, but more complex than anything I had done before. "You'll make this," he said. I looked at the pieces laid out on the table. Different sizes, different angles. It didn't look impossible, but it didn't look easy either. "I'm not sure I can do it," I admitted. Hai didn't respond right away. He just looked at the box, then at me. "You don't have to be sure," he said. "You just have to begin." I nodded slowly. Those words were starting to feel familiar. Begin. Not perfect. Not ready. Just begin. I picked up the first piece, measured it carefully. Too carefully. Checked it again and again. My hands hesitated before every movement, as if I was trying to avoid a mistake that hadn't even happened yet. And then, it happened anyway. A small cut in the wrong place. Not big, but enough to matter. I froze. That familiar feeling returned. Tight chest, heavy breath. The same feeling I used to have at work when something went wrong. The same voice in my head. "You should have known better. You're not good at this. You're too old to start over." I put the tool down. I stepped back, and for a moment, I wanted to walk away, not just from the table, but from the workshop, from the idea of starting again, from everything, because failing at something new felt worse than staying in something safe. At least in my old life, I knew who I was, even if I wasn't happy. Here, I didn't know anything, and that uncertainty felt dangerous. "Min," I heard my name, soft, calm. I turned. Anne was standing a few steps away. I hadn't noticed him come in. He walked closer, looked at the piece on the table, then at me. You stopped, he said. I nodded. I made a mistake. He looked at the wood again, then said something simple. So fix it. I shook my head. You don't understand. He didn't interrupt, so I continued. I've spent my whole life trying not to make mistakes. My voice was quiet, but it carried something heavy, because mistakes cost time. They cost money. They cost stability. I paused, and I had people depending on me. And listened, really listened, not like a child, but like someone trying to understand a story he had never fully heard before. And now, he asked, the question felt small, but it opened something much larger. Now, I hesitated. I don't know who I am without that responsibility. The words surprised me. I hadn't planned to say them, but once they came out, I couldn't take them back. For a long time, I had defined myself by what I provided, not by what I felt, not by what I wanted, but by what I gave. And now, that role was gone, and without it, I felt empty. Anne didn't answer immediately. He looked around the workshop, at the people, at the quiet movement of hands creating something new. Then he looked back at me. Do you remember when I was a kid? He said slowly, and I tried to fix my bicycle? I frowned slightly. The memory was faint. You told me not to touch it, he continued. You said I might break it. I felt something shift inside me. I was just trying to protect you, I said. I know, he replied. He nodded gently. And do you remember what happened after that? I stayed silent because I didn't remember. I stopped trying, he said. The words were not angry, not accusing, just honest. I waited for you to fix things, he continued, because I thought I couldn't. Something inside my chest tightened, not with pain, but with recognition. I had thought I was helping him, guiding him, protecting him from failure, but what I had really done was teach him to be afraid of trying. And then one day, Anne said, I tried again. He smiled slightly. You weren't there. I looked at him. What happened? I asked quietly. I failed, he said. Then he added, and then I learned. There was no drama in his voice, no big moment, just a simple truth. I realized something that day, he continued, that nobody starts by being good. He paused. They start by being willing. I looked down at the wooden piece in front of me. The mistake was still there, clear, visible, but suddenly, it didn't feel like the end. It felt like a point, a moment, a choice. Why didn't you tell me this before? I asked, and smiled gently. You weren't ready to hear it. That answer stayed with me because it was true. For years, I had been too focused on being right to learn anything new, too focused on stability to allow change, too focused on responsibility to notice what I was losing. And now, standing here, with a small mistake in front of me, I realized something I had never truly understood before. Mistakes are not what stop us. Fear is. Fear of looking foolish, fear of wasting time, fear of losing control. I picked up the tool again. My hands were still uncertain. But this time, I didn't wait for confidence. I just started, slowly, carefully, adjusting the piece, working around the mistake, not erasing it completely, but learning from it. Minutes passed, then more, until finally, the shape began to come together. Not perfectly, but honestly, when I stepped back this time, I didn't feel frustration. I felt something else. Respect, not for the result, but for the process, for staying, for not walking away. and watched quietly, then nodded. You see? He said. I nodded back. I think I do. But the truth was, I was only beginning to understand. That evening, after we got home, I couldn't stop thinking about what he had said, about the bicycle, about the mistake, about the years I had spent trying to avoid failure. And then a new thought appeared, one I had never allowed myself to consider before. What if I hadn't just been afraid of failure? What if I had been afraid of discovering something else, something deeper, something harder to face? What if I had been afraid of realizing that I had lived most of my life without ever truly choosing it? The idea was uncomfortable, almost painful, but I couldn't ignore it anymore because now, for the first time in years, I was making choices again. Small ones, simple ones, but real. The next day at the workshop, Hoy handed me the same box, finished, or at least as finished as I could make it. He examined it carefully, turned it in his hands, checked the edges, the corners, the small imperfection I had tried to fix. Then he looked at me. Do you see this? He asked, pointing at the flaw. I nodded. Yes. Good, he said. I waited, expecting criticism, correction, something. But instead, he smiled. This is where you learned. I blinked, not understanding. He tapped the imperfect corner gently. This part matters more than the perfect ones. I frowned. Why? He looked at me calmly. Because this is the part you will remember. He paused. And next time, you will do better. Those words stayed with me long after I left the workshop. Because they weren't just about the box. They were about everything, about life, about time, about all the years I thought were fixed, unchangeable, final. Maybe they weren't. Maybe they were just unfinished. But there was still one question I hadn't asked, one truth I hadn't fully faced. Why had a never become like me? After everything I had taught him, after all the lessons about safety, about stability, why had he chosen a different path? And more importantly, what had he seen that I had missed completely? The answer was not simple. And when I finally heard it, it would force me to confront something I had been avoiding for decades, not my future, but my past. Because sometimes, starting again doesn't begin with learning something new. It begins with understanding what you chose to forget. There are truths in life that do not arrive all at once. They come slowly, quietly, layer by layer, and sometimes they wait until you are finally still enough to hear them. I didn't ask in the question immediately. Not that night, not the next morning, because deep down, I knew that whatever answer he gave me, it would not be easy to accept. So instead, I did what I had always done. I stayed busy. I went to the workshop. I practiced. I focused on small tasks, measured pieces, smoothed edges, repeated movements. From the outside, it looked like progress, and in some ways, it was. My hands became steadier, my movements more confident. I made fewer mistakes, but inside, there was still something unsettled, a question waiting, a truth I was not ready to face. Until one afternoon, when everything became too clear to ignore. It was raining that day, not heavily, just a steady, quiet rain, the kind that makes the world feel slower, softer. The workshop was less crowded than usual. Only a few people had come. Anne wasn't there. He had told me earlier that he needed to meet someone. So for the first time, I was there alone, completely alone. No one guiding me, no one watching closely, just me and the work in front of me. I stood at the table, looking at a new project, another box. But this one was different, more detailed, more precise. It required attention, patience, care. I picked up the tools, started slowly. Everything felt familiar, comfortable, until I made a mistake. Not a small one, a clear one. A piece cut incorrectly, impossible to hide. I froze, and suddenly, everything came rushing back. The old voice, louder this time. This is why you shouldn't have tried. You had a stable life. You knew your place. And now look at you. I put the tool down, stepped back. My chest tightened. My hands felt heavy. The same feeling I had on the day I lost my job. The same fear. The same doubt. The same question. Who am I now? For a moment, I thought about leaving, walking out, going home, sitting in silence again, returning to the version of myself that at least felt certain. But then something unexpected happened. I heard laughter, soft, warm. I turned. The older man I had seen before, the one who always worked quietly, was standing at another table. He had made a mistake too, a big one. The piece he was working on had broken, split in a way that couldn't be fixed. And yet, he was smiling, even laughing. Not loudly, but genuinely, as if the mistake was not a problem, but a part of the process. I watched him for a moment, confused, curious. Then I walked over. "You don't seem upset," I said. He looked at me, still smiling. "Why would I be?" he asked. I gestured to the broken piece. "It's ruined." He picked it up, examined it, then nodded. "Yes," he said calmly. "It is." I frowned. "Then why are you smiling?" He paused, then said something I didn't expect. "Because 10 years ago, I would have been." I stayed quiet, waiting. He placed the broken piece on the table. 10 years ago, I lost everything, he continued. My business, my savings, my sense of who I was. His voice was steady, not emotional, but real. "I thought my life was over," he said. I felt something inside me shift. His story sounded familiar, too familiar. "What did you do?" I asked. He smiled again. "At first, nothing." He looked down briefly. "I was afraid." The word hung in the air, simple, honest. "I didn't try anything new," he continued, "because I didn't want to fail again." He paused. But then one day, I realized something. He looked at me directly. The life I was holding onto was already gone. Those words hit me harder than I expected, because they echoed something I had been feeling but didn't want to admit. "I was afraid of losing what I had," he said, "but I had already lost it." Silence filled the space between us, not uncomfortable, just heavy with meaning. "So I started again," he continued, slowly. "Badly." He laughed softly. "Very badly." I couldn't help but smile slightly. "But I kept going," he said, "and somewhere along the way, I stopped being afraid of mistakes." He gestured toward the broken piece. "This," he said, "it's just part of the story. Not the end. Just a moment." I looked at the piece again, then back at him. "And now?" I asked. He shrugged gently. "Now I enjoy learning." Such a simple sentence, but it carried something deep. Because enjoyment was something I had not associated with learning for a very long time. I thanked him, walked back to my table, and looked at my own mistake. Still there, still obvious. But now, it didn't feel like failure. It felt like a choice. Stay or leave. Try again or give up. And for the first time, I understood something clearly. No one was going to decide for me, not my past, not my fears, not even my son. This choice was mine. I picked up the tool again. My hands were still shaking slightly, but I didn't wait for that to stop. I started, slowly, carefully, working through the mistake, not trying to erase it, but trying to understand it. And as I worked, a thought came to me, one that I could no longer ignore. I had spent years teaching my son how to be safe, but he had learned something else, something I had never fully understood: how to be brave. Not loud bravery, not dramatic bravery, but quiet, consistent, everyday courage. The kind that shows up when you decide to try again, even when you're not sure you can. That evening, when Anne came home, I was waiting, not with anger, not with confusion, but with a question I was finally ready to ask. "Why didn't you become like me?" I said. He looked at me, calm. He didn't seem surprised, as if he had been expecting this moment. "I almost did," he said. The answer caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" I asked. He sat down across from me. "For a long time, I believed what you believed," he said, "about safety, about stability, about not taking risks." I felt a small weight in my chest, because those were the lessons I had given him. "But then I saw something," he continued. I leaned forward slightly. "What?" I asked. He looked at me, not as a child, but as someone who had been watching for a long time. "I saw that you weren't happy." The words were soft, but they landed heavily. "I saw how tired you were," he continued, "how quiet you became, how you stopped laughing." I looked down, unable to respond, because I knew he was right. "I realized something then," he said, "that I didn't want to live a life where I felt like that." Silence filled the room, not tense, but honest. "I didn't reject your lessons," he added gently. "I just added something to them." I looked up. "What?" I asked. He smiled slightly. "Uh, The courage to choose differently." Those words stayed with me long after he went to bed, because they were not just about him. They were about me, about all the choices I had made and all the ones I had avoided. For years, I thought my role was to teach him how to live, but now I was beginning to understand something deeper. Sometimes, children don't just learn from what we say, they learn from what we become, and sometimes they choose a different path, not because they reject us, but because they see something we cannot see ourselves. That night, I didn't feel regret, I didn't feel shame, I felt something else: clarity. For the first time in years, I could see my life, not as something fixed, but as something still open, still unfinished, still mine to shape. But there was still one final step, one decision I hadn't fully made yet. Learning was one thing, trying was another, but truly starting over meant something deeper. It meant letting go of the past, of the identity I had held onto for decades, of the version of myself that no longer existed. And that was the hardest part of all, because starting again is not just about building something new, it's about having the courage to release what you thought you could never live without. And I didn't yet know if I was ready to do that. There is a quiet moment when you realize you cannot go back, not because the past is gone, but because you are no longer the same person who lived in it. I didn't make the decision all at once. There was no dramatic turning point, no single moment where everything suddenly became clear. Instead, it happened slowly, like everything else in this journey, one small choice at a time. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The house was still, silent, the kind of silence that used to feel heavy. But now, felt different, open. I sat by the window, the same place where I had once sat, feeling lost. But this time, I wasn't searching for answers. I was listening to my thoughts, to my feelings, to something deeper that I had ignored for years. And for the first time, I asked myself a question I had avoided my entire life. Not, what should I do? Not, what is safe? But, what do I want now? The answer didn't come immediately, but it came honestly. I want to try, not succeed, not prove anything. Just try. And that was enough. That morning, I made a decision. I would stop waiting for certainty. I would stop waiting to feel ready because I finally understood something simple. Those moments never come. If you wait for confidence, you will wait forever. If you wait for the perfect time, you will never begin. So instead, I chose something different. I chose action, small, imperfect, but real. When I arrived at the workshop that day, everything looked the same. The same tables, the same tools, the same quiet rhythm. But something inside me had changed. I was no longer there to see if I could do it. I was there to do it. Hui noticed the difference immediately. You look different today, he said. I smiled slightly. I feel different, he nodded. That's where it starts. Not with skill, not with results, but with a decision. I picked up a new project, more complex than before. Not because I was ready, but because I was willing. And as I worked, I noticed something unexpected. The fear was still there, the doubt, the hesitation. They hadn't disappeared, but they no longer controlled me. They were just background noise. And for the first time, I understood something clearly. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to move forward anyway. Days passed, then weeks. The workshop became part of my life, not as a place to escape, but as a place to grow. I wasn't just learning how to build things. I was learning how to rebuild myself. Slowly, piece by piece. And then, one afternoon, something unexpected happened. Hoy approached me with a small idea. There's a local market this weekend, he said. Some of us are going to bring our work. I looked at him, not fully understanding. You mean sell it? I asked. He nodded. If you want. My first instinct was to say no, of course. That old voice returned immediately. You're not good enough. It's not ready. People will judge. But this time, I recognized the voice. And instead of listening, I paused. Then I asked a different question. What if I try? The thought felt uncomfortable, but also exciting. And that feeling was new. I'll do it, I said. The words came out before I could overthink them. He smiled. Good. That night, I told Anne. He didn't react with surprise. He just nodded, as if he had been expecting it. I'll come, he said. The market was small, simple, nothing impressive, just a few tables, people walking slowly, looking, talking. I set up my pieces carefully. My hands were slightly nervous, but my mind was calm. Because I understood something now. This wasn't about selling. It wasn't about success. It was about showing up, about allowing myself to be seen, not as who I used to be, but as who I was becoming. For the first hour, nothing happened. People walked by, looked briefly, moved on. And strangely, I was okay. Because I wasn't measuring my worth by their reactions anymore. I was measuring it by something else, by the fact that I was there, trying. Then, a woman stopped. She picked up one of my small wooden boxes, the one with the imperfect corner, the one I had almost thrown away. She looked at it carefully, ran her fingers along the edge, and then she smiled. "This one feels real," she said. I blinked. "Real?" I repeated. She nodded. "Not perfect," she said, "but honest." She paused. "I like that." And just like that, she bought it. I stood there, holding the money in my hand, not because of its value, but because of what it represented. Not success, not achievement, but something much more important: proof. Proof that starting again was not too late. Proof that imperfect things still have value. Proof that I still had something to offer. When I looked up, Anne was standing a few steps away, watching, not with pride, not with excitement, but with something deeper: peace, as if he had known all along that I would find my way here. That evening, we walked home together, slowly. The sky was quiet, the air was cool, and for the first time in years, I felt something I couldn't ignore. I felt alive, not because everything was perfect, not because my life was fully rebuilt, but because I was present, engaged, moving forward. "I understand now," I said quietly. Anne looked at me. "What?" he asked. I took a breath. "For years, I thought my job was to teach you how to live." He smiled slightly. "You did?" I shook my head gently. "No," I said. "I taught you how to be safe." I paused. "But you taught me how to live." He didn't respond immediately, and that was okay, because not every truth needs words. Some just need to be felt. When I look back now, I don't see my past as a mistake. I don't see those years as wasted. They were part of my story. They gave me stability. They gave me a family. They gave me everything I needed to reach this moment. But now, I understand something I wish I had known earlier. Life is not something you finish, it is something you continue. You don't reach a point where everything is complete. You reach moments where you choose to begin again. And sometimes those moments come later than you expect, at 50, at 60, or even beyond. But they come if you are willing to see them, if you are willing to take the first step. So if you are listening to this, and you feel like it's too late, let me tell you something simple. It's not. Not because time doesn't matter, but because your choice matters more. You don't need to change everything. You don't need to have a perfect plan. You just need to begin, small, slow, but honest. Because starting again is not about becoming someone new. It's about returning to the part of you that was always there, waiting for a chance. And maybe, just maybe, that chance is now. Thank you for listening. If this story made you think or feel something, take a moment and ask yourself one question. What is one small thing you are ready to begin today? If you'd like to continue learning English through stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and come back tomorrow for another story, another lesson, another quiet beginning.